Today, we're going to talk about VPN filter just a little bit, and then we're going to talk about something I know you don't want to hear about, but you're going to hear about anyway. It's GDPR. I know, but we got to talk about it, so stick around for Secure Digital Life.
This is a Security Weekly production.
Welcome to Secure Digital Life. If your users are going to keep putting risky stuff on your machine, you're screwed. So, Top can help us understand the complexity of blockchain.
I was reading through the show notes, man, and oof.
In binary, it would be 001. Who cares? But it's probably not significant anyway. Be like you're looking out through the HAL dot, you know, like, hey, Dave.
It's like Sim, but with, you know,
it would be like Sim
instead of AI. It's only.
Roger Williams University is a premier destination for cybersecurity, offering in-person and online classes designed and taught in collaboration with industry experts. Using virtual environments that simulate real-world systems, you'll solve complex cyber issues and analyze cyber threats to prepare you for in-demand jobs in this rapidly growing field. Whether you're just starting out or want to advance in the cyber profession, RWU offers degrees and coursework at all levels. Learn more at rwu.edu/cyber. Hi. Go to ITPro TV/Security Weekly and use the code SECWeekly30 to try it free for 7 days. And you get 30% off your monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. Check out our on-demand materials. Some of our previously recorded webcasts are now available on demand at securityweekly.com/on-demand, hence the name. And ticket sales are open for Social Engineering Rhode Island Conference, Saturday, June 16th at Salve Regina University in Newport, Rhode Island. Go to http, all that other stuff. http://se-ri.org to register. We are giving away 2 tickets to this conference, so if you want to go to the conference for free, if you will send your best, and there's been some good ones already, I mean, highly offensive and degrading memes of Paul and Larry to psw@securityweekly.com, we will at least laugh at them. So, I mean, you know, is it really that difficult to find offensive photos of Paul and Larry? How do you feel about user and entity behavior analytics? What about your SIEM? Check out Logarithm's webcast on June the 14th at 3 o'clock if you want to find out more about what all that stuff is. Russ is back in the studio now. So
hey, look, you can touch me.
I can see he's real. There's not even a thing here. No, it's not like a fake split screen thing or something where they're matching it up. Yeah, that would be cool, though.
Yeah, stay on your own side there.
Yeah, okay, yeah. No, don't maybe come back there. If I have to separate you two.
Yeah.
We'll put a. That's when you'll know we're not getting along anymore. We'll put a line down the middle of the table, like, this is his side, this is my side, and you don't get to come over here. Hey, if we survive that trip to Israel,
we did pretty well.
Yeah, we didn't. Nobody got like in a fight or anything, and sleeping in bus stations or any of that kind of stuff.
Nope.
Even on the balcony or in the bathtub. Or
although some guy almost died on the bus, remember?
Oh yeah, that's true.
We ended up in a hospital, Beth Israel hospital.
Oh yeah, that's just true. We got to visit the emergency room and see all that. And,
but he lived, thank God.
He did?
Yeah, he survived.
Oh, okay.
I talked to his daughters.
I went through his stuff.
Oh man, anything good?
Well, I'm not telling. I kept all. You should have been there. You're out there trying to help, and I was like in there. I was like, Jesus, hey man,
first do no harm.
I was like, he's a write-off. Russ out there doing CPR, and the guy was like, hey, he's done for, man. I was like, I'm going through his stuff before somebody else gets to it. And it was like, yeah. All right. Some quick notes about VPN filters. So VPN filters been in the news a lot. I did put a link on the show notes to Talos Intelligence, which is Cisco's operational group. They were the ones that supposedly discovered this malware attack, and I just put a few real quick notes on here to inform you of it. You can go read that. It's not even that. It's not like a real technical paper. You can read it and get pretty much everything you need to know out of it. Basically, it was a Russian botnet that Cisco Talos found that affects a bunch of different brands of routers that are running certain operating systems and certain feature sets. It wasn't a huge list. So the article starts off and says there's like 500,000 devices that are infected, but I'm not sure that that's an actual scientific measurement. My impression of it was they were estimating that was how many possible devices were infected. Apparently there's a lot of it out in the wild. It created this big, maelstrom of stuff over the weekend with people talking about it was last week really, people talking about IoT and all these kind of issues with that. The brands that were affected were so far that they know about were Linksys, Microtech, which I don't even know that one, Netgear, TP-Link, and there was another like network attached storage that was QNAP. So there was some stuff out there. Apparently no Cisco stuff was affected except Linksys, which Cisco makes. I noticed.
Well, and they were consumer grade anyway,
and it's
not commercial.
And it's not all of them.
Yeah.
So it wasn't every one of the things that these companies make. It was just some very limited. Like TP-Link just had one particular router on their list. I didn't look at the whole list of every one. I just looked to see if any of mine were.
Same.
But basically, you should check out the list, see if your model's on the list. You should also maybe go to the company's website and check out your border router. I'm not as concerned about internal routers because they're behind a firewall, and they're not exactly sure how this stuff gets infected, but they said there were lots of probes to port 23. There was lots of port probes and other things going on. And then it sets this up inside your system and then starts phoning home. So if you have pretty good border security, you probably don't have a huge threat from this like anything. What they recommended was that you reboot your router and reset it to factory defaults, although some pieces of this apparently persist beyond.
Yeah, I guess stage one.
Well, the stage one got knocked out by the reboot, and then it can get reinfected, though, is the problem. So if you reconnect it, so if it's attached to the border and it's exposed to the world, it can be infected again. So they were saying reset it. My recommendation is either go to your provider if you have one of those models and see if they put a firmware patch in place and then patch the firmware, which will also serve the purpose of getting rid of any malware that's there. So if you get that, and then maybe replace the device. Some of us have enough routers sitting around that if I found one, I went through I think there's 5 routers at my house, and I went through all of them, and none of them are of the brands that were compromised, and most of them are behind firewalls anyway, so they're not exposed to the world at large. But my border router was not, and I was actually using my backup border router because my main router failed, and it's being replaced. But so I actually checked. And so if you have an extra router that you could put online, if you have that, and maybe just replace the thing. I mean, it's like maybe it's time for an update if you've got a compromisable router. But that was all.
Maybe we should do a show on upgrading your router.
Yeah, we could.
I mean, a lot of people do 3 to 5 years of old technology. And things have changed so much.
And what I do, I also with my router, I keep the newest old one. And I leave it configured. So if I have a border failure, I can literally just take the router I was using before. Like when this new router failed, I went and got the other one up, and I just put it back online. And that way we were down for like 10 minutes. And then I took the new one that was messed up and tried to figure out what was wrong with it, and finally spent now the 3 weeks of trying to get it replaced under warranty because it was almost brand new, and it just biffed.
Oh.
I think the tech support people were quite confused, but
it sucks when you know more about it than they do.
I was like, "Have you rebooted it?" Yes, I've rebooted it.
It's like walking into Best Buy and asking
I determined that the wireless NICs had failed, so there was a failure on the board, and I could see it failing, and I tried to show them the screenshots of it failing, and of course the guy's like, "Oh yeah, so could you turn the power off now?"
It's all scripted, that's why.
Yeah, I know. They got poor guys just reading from a script. So anyway, so we want to talk about GDPR today because you like all the rest of us are probably getting thousands of email, maybe not thousands, but you're getting a lot of emails asking you to opt in to receive junk mail from the companies again, which is kind of a nice feeling to, and they're literally going, please go to our website and opt in or you will miss out on all the email we've been sending you all the time.
Which I never signed up for in the first place
exactly.
when I bought something from them.
So we thought we would talk a little bit about GDPR and what it means and what it means to you. I am going to say up front that I'm not an attorney and I don't think Russ is either. So if you need legal advice about GDPR, how to be in compliance, that's another whole issue. So this is just a little bit more about what it is and how it may affect you, or it may not affect you very much. I did put a link in the show notes to the actual law. So you can actually go on the Lex site for the EU. And if you want to read the really legalese version of it, there are about 8,000 summaries online of it. They vary. I looked at quite a few of them, and they all sort of choose what they want to talk about, but they're mostly pretty accurate. This thing's called the General Data Protection Regulation, and it went into effect in the EU. That's the European Union, if you don't know what that is. Somebody already had asked me that last week, like, what is the EU? And I was like, oh, it's like a couple
uranium.
It's a couple of guys in, like, Senegal that formed a club. No, it's the European Union. And on the 25th of May was when this went into place, and it was a replacement for the old 1995 Privacy Act that was already in place in the EU. And you have to understand something, that privacy in Europe has always been far more invasive, is that a good way to put it, than in the United States. Like Germany, when we were doing forensics, Germany was very, very restrictive about forensics. And I taught some forensics classes in Frankfurt, and there was stuff that we had to actually think about a little bit when we were, and our people would point out in the class, they go, well, yeah, you maybe will do that in the United States, but you sure can't do that here. There's all kinds of issues there about people's privacy, about the data that they own, like taking a hard drive from even from a criminal and taking it outside of Germany. There's all this stuff involved in that. And again, I'm not an attorney, and I'm particularly not a German attorney, which would be kind of interesting. So one of the things to understand is this is a really, really complex law. It doesn't really seem like it's that complex, but it is. And it may impact your organization, even if you're sitting there saying, Doug, I'm not in the EU. I've never been to the EU. I don't want to go to the EU. Russ and I are going to the EU very soon. But in the EU, the law says that if you do business in the EU, and hang on, so not just do business, you say, oh, I don't sell any of my products in the EU. If you have and again, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not trying to do the court's job. This is just a discussion about it. It's possible that that could expand to the simple fact that you have a website that people in the EU could access. So now I don't know what they do to you if you break those. Now this gets into that sovereignty thing. It's like when people rip you off and they're located in Nigeria, and you call the State Department and say, could we invade to get my $75 back? It doesn't really happen.
Well, there were two fine levels that I had researched. One was as serious as 4% of your gross international revenue. Another, for the most severe case, another was 2% on the lower end. But that's a substantial amount of money.
But I don't know how they enforce that if you're not based in the EU. So if your company's based in Delaware, I don't know how they hit you with a fine. I don't know how it works. So, I mean, that's that. Now you need to call your attorney if you think you're about to be fined. But they can fine you a lot of money. I mean, those were like massive dollar fines. So right now, it's affecting, I mean, according to law, and again, remember, any kind of new law, whether it's in the United States or anywhere else, it has to go through a kind of legal cycle. So when a new law is passed anywhere, unless it was just something really, really cut and dried, like you can't touch this table.
Can't touch this.
Although even then, I guess it would do. You could go to court, and I could say, well, what's the definition of touch? Was it a good touch of the table or a bad touch of the table? Show me, Mr. Table. Show me where. I watch Rick and Morty, and it really messes you up. You got to be careful about watching Rick and Morty, or you just start seeing the world from this like really sideways viewpoint, and the next thing you know, you're institutionalized. But at this point, it does affect companies, even if you're not in the EU. So that is a big issue if you are an enterprise, even if you're a small enterprise, because this thing was not like one of those laws where they said, oh, if your company, only if your company has 500 or more employees or whatever. It was just like basically everyone is affected by this law. So that theoretically means if you have a website and someone in the European Union could access that website, then they could, I guess, apply this. Now, the courts would have to interpret all that then. So then that's where stuff ends up in court for years and years and years, and they slowly sort out and create precedents and all this kind of stuff. But if you in any way track the behavior of citizens of the EU, so that means you got cookies on your website, that means you do data collection on your website, you see who touched you and what the IP was when they touched you from, and all that, all of a sudden, touching that table, Russ keeps touching it because he wants to see if he can push the law to the limit. And there's probably like,
I'm not touching you.
DHS agents are on their way right now, Russ. You'll hear them beating on the door pretty soon. But that pretty much just grabs up almost everyone there. There are some other issues. I was trying to read this, but it was really complicated. I call this governing by fiat. So this is the term that I use for this. So basically, I pass a law that says that anybody who does business with Freedonia must have on a powdered wig. So this is a new law in Fredonia, and we say if you can do this. Now, normally that law would apply to Fredonia, but because of the way I wrote the law and because of the nature of the world today, it means that everybody in the world may effectively be buying products from or selling products in Fredonia. So if you're required to wear a powdered wig at all times, well, I think that's a pretty good law, and I'm a big advocate. But if the citizens of Fredonia access my business, even if I don't actually actively sell things in Fredonia, that may mean that the people in Grand Fenwick are subject to the law as well. And if you don't know those two references, you can look them up. But do you know those references?
No.
Really?
No. Fredonia? I don't remember what Fredonia.
Fredonia is from Duck Soup. That was the dictatorship that Groucho was running in Duck Soup in 1935. Wasn't that movie came out?
I don't remember that one, no.
What about Grand Fenwick? Do you know that one? That's a more modern one. It's not that modern. You probably weren't born either. It's The Mouse That Roared with Peter Sellers.
Oh, no,
it's a country that decides they'll attack the United States so that when they lose, they'll get war reparations and they're going to get all this money, and then the United States just surrenders and says, okay, it's all yours.
No, I haven't seen those or what. Or read
oh,
them.
well, yeah. Well, both of them are. Duck Soup's not. Some people don't get mad at me. Duck Soup's not as good as the Mouse That Roared is a really good Peter Sellers movie from the 60s.
I do like Peter Sellers.
Yeah, well, that's a good one. But anyway, so I mean, that's what governing by fiat is. So the EU has passed a law that applies to lots and lots of people in the world. Now, if you have more than 250 employees and you're subject to this law, you're immediately required to have a data protection officer, which means you have to have a person who has been trained. It can't just be like, I mean, we've seen that with like Sarbanes-Oxley and all these other kind of acts, where you just kind of go, okay, I'm the president, I'm the CEO, I'm the owner, I'm the operator, and I'm the data protection officer. Yeah, there was some more restrictions about that. But it said if it had more than 250 people, but it also could easily extend down to one. So if you were actually collecting data, even if you just have one person, you end up having to effectively have a data protection officer. And what I read in the law, it said the person must have an in-depth knowledge of the GDPR. And I already saw there were stacks of companies offering this training. So if you'd been smart, you might have got on board with this and had training set up and ready to go so that you could train data protection. I'm like, wow, I wish I'd thought of that. We could have had a class. And
not like, what was it, the head of Equifax when they had that big breach was like some woman who had a degree in art or something.
It was like, yeah, it was like the CIO was, I mean, not that that's a big, I mean, I've known people that were very technically. Degrees in art are great and awesome. But I mean, I've known people that didn't have degrees in technology that were quite qualified too. But this thing required you to send some training. Now, I don't know, I couldn't determine what it said in-depth knowledge. Now, I don't know what that means. And again, that's going to be something that ends up in court. I did hear Jack Daniels say something on Security Weekly last week where they talked about this a little bit as well. And Jack said, sorry, Jack. But Jack said, that a lot of this, you don't want to be the test case.
Yeah.
So, and you start getting 4% of your what was it?
Gross revenue.
Gross revenue?
Yeah, with the EU companies.
And remember, lawyers only go after people that matter, because that means like, so Facebook. So that's why you've been getting all this stuff from Facebook and Google and all these kind of people. You're required to report breaches. So this is something that I think we needed for a long time. You have 72 hours to report a breach to everyone, essentially. So you're not supposed to report it in public. You're supposed to report it to all the people who've been breached, so that is out there. And so that brings us essentially to the essence of it. The essence of this law is about privacy and your right to your own data. So
and right to be forgotten.
Yeah. So, and we'll go over them, but I had. I mean, for me, this is one of the quintessential questions of the day, which is that you go on Facebook, and I'll use them as an example. You go on Facebook, and we've had a lot of the Congress was interviewing. Yeah, watch that sometime if you want some cheap laughs. Interviewing Zuckerberg, but I mean, basically, when you go on Facebook, you click a link that says, I understand this. There's a good episode of South Park about this, too, about clicking Apple links, and then they apparently at some point in clicking all those Apple agreements, you have agreed to be part of a human centipede.
Oh, yeah, the human iPad.
It's called the human centipede.
Yeah, centipede, that's what it was.
So
awful.
Yeah, but it was very on point for, it's been quite a few years since that episode came out. But the opinion of that was that we do this now. I mean, I don't even know how many times a week I agree to something that is 50 pages of legalese. And of course, even if you get the one where it forces you to scroll through the entire article, you know, it's like, okay, yeah, I drug through the 75 pages of legalese for that. So one of the things I wanted to be sure and mention was Confucian law. This is like obscure reference day.
You mentioned that on the show before, and it has to be plainly understood.
Right.
Or in
I mean, one of the ideas of Confucian law was that all laws that that you have should be understandable by everyone, not just by very sophisticated individuals, and which, when those rules were written, probably also meant people who couldn't read. I'm not sure how you get around that, but I mean, today we all pretty much can read. But we're still stuck with a 75-page document, which they've dumped in everything but the kitchen sink. I need 2 attorneys and maybe a panel of experts to explain to me all the technical terms, and then the lawyers to advise me on whether or not I should say, okay, yeah, I want to download Angry Birds. And I know that's a dated reference, but you know, Angry Birds had its moment.
Or Flappy Bird was the other.
Flappy Bird, whatever it is. But I mean, any of those things really become a problem, and you've agreed to that. So when you signed up for Facebook, you agreed to all sorts of things. You probably don't know what all you've agreed to. I don't even know what all you've agreed to. When you signed up for Instagram, you agreed to all sorts of things. And those companies made their money by collecting and selling your data. So one of the things that GDPR did then was say they could only use your data for legal reasons. So they could not do illegal. I was like, well, okay, thank you for stating the obvious.
And for the reasons that it was originally intended, and that they couldn't tease out.
Exactly. So that was the next item. So you can only use it for the purpose for which it was intended. So that means if somebody a restaurant says, put your birth date in and we'll send you a gift card every year on your birthday, they can't turn around and sell that information about your birth date to an insurance company so they can target you with marketing, or they could I don't know, discriminate against you on your health care, which is a very nasty little path, but that is definitely a path that's been going on. So Facebook and other companies have been selling all sorts of things about you, whether it was your birth date, whether it was your political likes and dislikes, sites you like and sites you don't like, to other companies. And for the most part, I don't think they actually knew exactly what most of those companies were doing with the data. They're just like, would you like to buy a giant bundle of data?
Well, hence the Cambridge Analytica.
Exactly.
Stuff,
And so I'm sure, at least at the highest level at Facebook, they basically sat down and said, I don't know what you're going to do with it. Here it is. You want to just buy this big box of data? We don't know what you do with it. We don't ask what you do with it. All you got to do is sign right here and say, we will not use this data for any ill intent. And like, okay, and here's your check. So GDPR suddenly changes that game, and they say, Facebook, you cannot. If I agree to it, that's another whole matter. But Facebook can't just take the data where they said, Doug, which famous rock star are you based on your selections of these different flavors of pudding? They can't take that information and say Doug chose this flavor of pudding and therefore he was, Bob Dylan. And we're going to sell that information because it's secret psychological information that means that I really secretly want to be like, have somebody throw wafers at me or something. So you can tell I've been watching Rick and Morty. It's just clearly. Like, it gets really strange. They have to be transparent. So this was another piece of this. So what is their intent? So they can no longer just say, we collect data, sign here. If you want to play Angry Birds, if you want to see this video, you have to click here and say, okay, they're supposed to be transparent in providing you with information about the data and what they're going to plan on doing with it. And they aren't supposed to collect more data than is necessary. Now, again, every single one of these items is vague. It's not specific, and it would be very difficult to write a law like that. But what that means is that over the years, this is going to go to court, and they're going to hit somebody with a massive fine, and they're going to say, hey, X company in France, we're going to nail you with this giant fine because you've done this. And the company says, oh, no. It was absolutely necessary that we figured out what your favorite flavor of pudding was and then sold that. They're supposed to delete the data once the purpose has been fulfilled. Mr. Meeseeks, look at me. But I already mentioned that particular Confucian law. You have a right to your information. So this is another piece of this, that you should have a right to this. And you've already seen this, even in the United States. So you've seen Facebook saying, oh, yeah, you can get your information. Why don't you dump it and see all this? And all of a sudden there's New York Times and Washington Post articles. It was very hard to find all that information previously. Then all of a sudden you could go in there and click a button and it would download everything they had on you and show you, this is what we know about you already, your favorite flavor of pudding and all this other kind of stuff. So you can request it, and one of the other pieces of this in the transparency part of it was that you should have a right to be able to get it in some format you could actually use. They can't just give it to you in some giant encrypted file and say, here's 100 billion records, so you feel free to sort through it. You have the right to get things corrected. And I'm going to tell you, that sounds like an obvious one, but I had a problem on a credit report years and years ago. Same. It took me almost a year to get that sorted out because some other person whose name was David White, not even my name, had stuff on a like Sears credit card that I didn't even have, and somehow that was on my credit report, and I was told over and over and over again by the credit reporting agency that I needed to prove I did not have that credit card. And I said, how would you like me to prove that? Picture me naked? What do you want? Send nudes. I don't know. It's very confusing when you get into that, and they tell you to prove a negative. I'm like, I just asked the guy, I was like, honestly, tell me, what do I need to provide? And he was like, well, you'll have to get an affidavit that you don't have the credit card. And I'm like, how do you get that? It's like, how do I get a company to issue an affidavit saying, no, he doesn't have this card? And they're like, well, you'll have to contact them, probably get an attorney. It literally took me a year of fighting with those guys to get this taken off my record. So theoretically, anyway, you have a right to get things that are wrong in the data corrected. So it means you review it, and then you do that. And then consent. So we hear a lot about consent these days, whether it's about sex or it's about whatever, but we hear about consent here again. So they are going to have to give you in plain English, supposedly, or French or whatever, it's the EU, so I guess it doesn't have to be in English.
Qu'est-ce que c'est?
Yeah, well, it could be. I mean, I don't know if they have to provide it in any language. Of course, they probably do. I didn't read that much. I should have looked at that.
Yeah.
But basically, the thing about consent here was that it had to be clear. So they couldn't give you a 75-page legal document explaining all these things. It had to be about this, and you had to consent to it. That's what they're giving these emails about right now. They're trying to get you to come back and opt back in because you have been effectively opted out. But the consent could not be part of another agreement. So they can't just take, here are our site policies, click OK. They can't give you this big giant thing and say, all this stuff's in there, feel free to dig through it to paragraph 14 on page 975, subparagraph T, and that's where you've agreed to something. It had to be something clear and concise that you could actually read. What else have I got here? Yeah, and it also said that you had to actually understand that you were clicking. And some of this is going to suck. It's going to get to that point where you have to initial every line, you know, and it's like, you know, you initial here every each line. Buying a house. Well, yeah, when you buy a house, you have to sign every single page with your initials to indicate that you read that page. So probably now you're going to get a big document that says in plain English, you know, and then it's 35 pages, and you have to click each page and approve each one. Maybe just skip playing that game, and maybe they'll sort this out. But you also have to be able to withdraw consent, so you have to be able to jump in there and say, okay, I'm sorry, no, I agreed yesterday, I'm not agreeing today, no thank you. You can object to the use of your data, so you can actually make this much more specific. It was like you could limit their ability to use it in certain situations. That part got so legal, I was starting to get scared, and I didn't know exactly what it meant. It started turning into legalese, and you know, I was like, okay. The other one was automation. They did say you were not allowed to. You could protest the use of automation to evaluate your data. So if they were using AI, they were using some kind of neural net to evaluate your data, like credit scores, you could request that it be manually evaluated, which I'm not sure what that means either. I guess that means some guy named Jacques with a gawa hanging out of his mouth going, denied. Yeah, was that racist? You know, sorry. I'm going to be arrested in
French.
No. Yeah. I'll have to call Roman Polanski for help. You have the right to be forgotten. That was my favorite thing I've ever read in a document. You have the right to be forgotten. It actually sounds like some kind of like a mortuary or like a futuristic mortuary. You have the right to be forgotten.
Not remembered.
Yes, not remembered at all.
Forgotten.
We scatter your ashes to the four winds. Feed them to pigs. You will be forgotten. I like it. We get a sponsor for that. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you could no longer feed yourself? That's a really dated reference if you get that one. You have a right to get all this stuff in person and in some reasonable format. But what does it all really mean? So we don't live in the EU. So what do you think, Russ?
I think that if we're engaging with business or companies that serve or exist in the EU, or we live in the EU and we're engaging with external, what do they call them? Alien, xeno something or other.
Xenophobes?
Yeah, but this was some other thing I read today on this xeno something.
Hydrophobia.
Yeah, and so then we're still susceptible to and protected by this particular, or at least in the beginning anyway.
Yeah, I think that there's a sort of vague belief that you're protected. I mean, as far as individuals go. Now, a lot of companies, what they have done, and the reason you're getting all these emails, and you may be telling yourself, I'm not in the EU, why are they sending me this? Yeah. A lot of big companies like Facebook and Google and those guys are just saying, look, we're just going to adopt this.
Yeah, for globally.
Yeah, that keeps us out of trouble with it. But here's the big but. The big but is they say that, but then you don't have any rights. If you're in the EU, you do. But if you're not in the EU,
right.
Am I going to be able to file a lawsuit in the EU and say Google violated my rights because now what Google did was figure out who was in the EU and who wasn't based on your location?
Only if you live there.
Right. So Google and Facebook and all these people can pretty quickly sort you out into categories and go, you're an EU resident, you're not an EU resident. We can sell your data. We're not. I mean, even though you agreed to this. So I guess my point with that sort of bizarre thing is, look, just because this law exists in the EU, this law has no intention of protecting anyone else. So that means that whether or not Google and Facebook and anybody else are using this, and that's their policy, does not mean that it applies to you. Even if you've gotten a notification of it and you said, oh yeah, I agree to this new wonderful policy in this law, because in the United States, we don't have this law. In fact, we have the opposite of this law. We just got net neutrality rescinded. So when that kicks in June, basically, unless the Congress does something in June, we have a show about net neutrality. You can go back and watch it where I talked about it last year. When that goes, I think it's June 18th is when that kicks. They're basically not only not doing this, they're doing the opposite of this. They're saying, hey, ISPs, you can do anything you want. You can screw these guys, they're customers, caveat emptor, yay! And they don't appear to be doing anything about it. So unless the Congress does something about that in the meantime and forces the FCC to change this, like what I think is a ridiculous policy, basically net neutrality is going to end. And that means that the companies can do whatever they want. But this law, just remember, this law does not protect you if you're not in the EU. And even if the company acts like it does. So Facebook can act like they're going to protect you all they want. They can say this is their policy, but there's nothing at all that I can see that's going to preclude Facebook from turning right around and saying, yeah, but all these people are not in the EU, so therefore we can sell their data. We can go right back to doing what we were doing before. We can do all these other things. So be careful about this, and don't let that cross that boundary with you in terms of thinking that your locale, unless you're in the EU, is going to actually protect you from this kind of stuff. There's a lot of implications of all this, though. The other side of it is that companies can just say, we're not going to do business with people in the EU. So you could just say, okay, we're cutting off Europe. Tough. I mean, you could. I mean, you may want to block your website to IP addresses that are in the EU, so you don't have to comply with this. And this is one of the sort of negative fallouts of this, and it could mean that people in the EU get declined access to certain services. So, for instance, Hulu and Netflix and all those guys, they sell service by location. So like Netflix is blocked in China. Hulu is blocked in China. They won't let you use it there. And now Hulu's even blocking VPN access. I saw that the other day. I tried to get into Hulu on my phone, and it was said, oh, you're using a VPN. You can't do that. And I was like, well, that sucks. So I got to figure out a way around that, but I haven't figured it out yet. So there may be ways around this for all parties, but maybe not. So there's definitely some issues with that as far as I'm concerned. And I put some other examples in the show notes about different kind of things if you want more to read more about that. Obviously, this is a move in the right direction to try to protect your privacy. I'm not sure it's the end. I'm not sure it's the solution to all these problems, really. I think it will take years and years for the courts to sort through all this and determine exactly what it means to every individual, and there will be lots and lots of lawsuits. There's going to be lots of cancellations and whatever. Russ, anything else in that?
No, I mean, I've been getting, like we started off with, hundreds, literally hundreds of emails saying, oh, we've updated our privacy policy or terms of service. Please come in and re-opt in and all that stuff. But, I mean, it might be a good way for us to start fresh.
Yeah.
If we don't re-opt in, like I don't know about you guys or you all, but I'm getting, probably around 1,500 junk spam messages a day.
Yep.
Just, because of the nature of everything that I do. So
I already wrote a filter to block mine, so it puts mine straight in the trash. I'm like, I'm not re-opting in. So
yeah.
if I need it, I'll come to you.
So I look at it as a positive thing. I mean, we're moving in the right direction, like you said. Privacy is super important, and the internet as a whole has been collecting data on us for, since we've had it, 95 for me. So, I mean, that's, 30 years or something like that. So, it's a lot of time.
And remember, your ISP can still collect information about you like crazy in the United States, so use a VPN.
Yeah.
And when net neutrality lifts, they'll be able to collect and sell and do whatever they want with that information. So, all right, so that's our quick review of GDPR. Be sure and consult your attorney, one licensed to practice law and appropriate for you. Or get one of those random internet lawyers that says, if it ain't broke, don't fix it or something. Thanks for watching SDL. We'll see you next time. Bye.